Hello and welcome to another episode of Cards Unbarred. My name's Ryan, and in this video I'm going to teach you the two-player only trick-taking game, Violet and the Grumpy Nisse, designed by Pedro Pereira. The components in Violet and the Grumpy Nisse consists of 36 playing cards, numbered 1 to 9 in 4 suits, water, mushroom, mountain, and gem. However, the number 5 in all 4 suits is a wild card and will act as all 4 suits when played during trick play. The game also comes with 4 advantage tokens, 10 event tiles, one which comes with 4 suit markers, a lantern pawn, a violet pawn, a Torech pawn, and 4 Nordic helper discs, as well as 1 main game board and 1 turn resolution flowchart. To set up for Violet and the Grumpy Nisse, first place the game board in the middle of the table. Players should sit on one side of the board depending on the character they want to play as. The person who would like to play as Violet should be on the left side, and the player as Torech should be on the right side. Next, place the Violet pawn on the leftmost space of the journey track, the Torech pawn on the rightmost space of the fear track, and the lantern pawn on the leftmost space of the lantern track. Next, place the 4 yellow discs, known as Ordep's helpers, on the starting space of each suit on the journey track. Then take the 4 advantage tokens, which are the tokens that have the moons on the back in the top left corner, and place them on the 4 designated spaces through the middle of the game board. The Torech player should now take the 10 event tiles, shuffle them together, and randomly take 5 of them, making sure the Violet player does not see them. From those 5 tokens, the Torech player will select 3 of those and place them face down directly above the fear track. Normally these tokens stay face down until revealed during gameplay. However, for your first few games, it is recommended to keep them face up from the start. The 7 event tiles that were not selected should be returned back to the box, and when playing with the event tokens face down, make sure to keep all those event tokens that are removed face down so the Violet player does not see them. Finally, shuffle the main playing card deck and reveal 4 cards face up directly below the game board, and place the rest of the deck to the left of those 4 cards. And now that we're all set up, we're ready to begin the game. Before we can begin the first trick, each player needs to draft cards until they have a 4-card hand. To complete the draft, the Violet player will first select either themselves or the Torech player to draft one of the 4 face-up cards on the table. So let's say in this case, she picks the Torech player, and the Torech player decides to take this 8 mountain. And after a card is drafted, we immediately take the top card from the deck to refill the 4-card tableau. Then Violet must select one of the 4 face-up cards to put into their hand. So maybe they take the 4 water, we refill the tableau, and now it's time to draft the second card of the hand. However, instead of it going back to the Torech player, Violet gets to choose again who drafts first or second. All 4 cards that are drawn this way, the Violet player chooses to take first or second. So maybe she doesn't want any of these cards, so she decides to let Torech pick first. Maybe Torech goes with the 3 diamond, we refill, and Violet is happy with that new card that came out and takes that, and we refill. And then for the third one, maybe she wants one of these cards, so she'll go first, making Torech go second. Again, she gets this choice all 4 drafting times. So maybe she has Torech decide again, and Torech takes that, flip a new card, and Violet will take this card, and we will do it one more time. Now, another thing to mention, I'm keeping these cards face up for the video. However, as soon as you draft a card, you should be keeping it hidden from your opponent. So these cards, whenever you have them in your hand, will remain hidden. Even though they saw you draft them, they will have to remember what you've taken. And there's also abilities on certain cards that'll let you take cards from the deck. So making sure to keep your hand hidden is important during the game. But for this video right now, I'm just going to leave them all face up. And for the final draft, Violet will go first and take this 5. And finally, the Torech player will decide to take that 8 that just came out. And we'll refill. And now that all players have 4-card hands, we're ready to begin the first trick. Trick play in Violet and the Grumpy Nisse does follow that flow chart that I mentioned that comes with the game. However, I will be explaining all the steps in this video. The very first trick of the game will always have the Violet player lead the first trick. In Violet and the Grumpy Nisse, it is a may-follow trick-taking game, which means the lead player can play any card from their hand that they want to, and the following player can play any card as well. There's no requirement to follow any suit that gets played. So maybe Violet decides to play this 9 gem. When it comes to the Torech player, even though they have this 3 gem in hand, it doesn't matter. They can play any card that they want to. So maybe they decide to play that 3 water. When resolving a trick to see who's going to win, the first thing you want to check are the cards themselves. Do they have the same color? In this case, they do not have the same color, so there's a couple things we need to check. The first one is the location where Violet is at. The first 3 steps on the journey track are all considered neutral colors, but these spaces along the board match the 4 suits in the game. Whenever Violet's pawn is at that location, that suit becomes trump for those tricks. So any card of that suit would be stronger than the other 3 suits. So in this trick, this 3, if Violet was here, would be stronger than this 9, even if it's a lower number. But because we're in the neutral area, there is no trump suit. So whenever the suits are different, the first card played is going to win. Essentially, this was lead suit and this was played off suit, which is going to lose in a normal trick-taking game. Then, after you've determined who the winner is, you'll check to see each card if it has an ability and trigger its ability. I'm not going to go over all the abilities right now. I'll do that later in the video. But if you ever play a card that would match the suit that Violet's in, aka be the trump suit, you never trigger the ability on that card. So if it was played like this while Violet was here, the 9 doesn't have any ability because it's just an X through it or the slash through it. But this 3 does have an ability at the bottom, but because it would be trump suit, it doesn't get triggered. Now, because we're in neutral, means that ability will get triggered. So the Torech player would complete this ability and Violet would do nothing. Again, at this point in the video, I'm going to skip the abilities. We're going to explain those towards the end. I'm just going to go over the flow of trick play and how Violet's going to move first. But now that we've determined Violet has won the trick, the next thing we have to do is determine what Violet will do based on moving along the journey track. So Violet has 2 options. The first one is she can move 1 space on the journey track and spend 1 unit of fuel. Whenever you spend fuel, you'll take the lantern pawn and you'll move it 1 space down the lantern track. You'll see those little dots in between the larger circles. Those are spaces. So in this case, to move 1, we would just move the pawn over there. So this is showing Violet moving through the land, through the forest, the mountains, potentially all the way to the end. And it's costing fuel from her lantern as time is going by. The other option Violet can do, instead of moving forward, is stay where she is and gain back 3 units of fuel on her lantern. Of course, at the beginning of the game, she has a full lantern, so it would always make sense for her to move 1 and spend 1. But let's say we're further down in the game, she's all the way here and fuel's way down here, and we're worried that moving forward we're going to keep pushing too much fuel. Well, Violet can choose to stay where she is, take time to go through her lantern and add more fuel to it and get back 3 units. So you would just move back 3 spaces. So just recapping, those are always Violet's 2 options whenever she wins a trick. She can move forward 1 space and spend 1 fuel, or stay in place and get 3 units of fuel back. But let's step back here to the beginning, and we'll have her move forward 1 space and spend 1 unit of fuel. There are some additional things that can happen depending on if Violet moves onto these Ordep helper spaces. So let's just say we were here and Violet was to win the trick. When Violet would move 1 space and she lands on this disc, she would actually spend 0 fuel. This is one of Ordep's helpers, which Ordep is her friend that she's trying to reach. The whole thematic story is she's running away from her house at night to hang out with her friend that's in the forest. And Ordep has put some of its helpers, which are lighting the way for Violet, meaning Violet doesn't have to spend any lantern fuel because this is bright enough for her to see without having to turn her lantern on. So when you move onto that space, you would not use any lantern fuel. And the last thing to mention through movement are those 4 advantage tokens. Those come into play whenever Violet moves through an entire suit and never stops. So the first 3 spaces, all these neutral ones, there's no advantage token. So her moving and or stopping won't do anything. But as soon as we get into one of the 4 suited areas, then you have to start worrying about her constantly moving through. If Violet, let's say she wins a trick and moves, wins a trick and moves, wins a trick and moves, she never stopped to regain fuel, so she will gain control of this advantage token. I'll explain what this token does a little bit later. However, if she ever decides to stop to regain 3 units of fuel, this advantage token would go to Torech instead. So there's a constant balance of Violet constantly moving forward to make sure she can gain one of those tokens, but if she does choose to stop, that token will go to Torech. So with all of that movement in mind, let's come back to the beginning. She'll move 1 space and spend 1 unit of fuel. Now that all movement and all abilities have been triggered, the 2 cards that were played in the trick will go to a certain area depending on who won the trick. When Violet wins the trick, the 2 cards that were played go into a face-down discard pile next to the draw pile. When Torech wins, the 2 cards will go over into the fear track, which is off to the side of the board, as you can see here with those little square spots. So the very first time Torech would win a trick, you'll place the 2 cards in the top area on the fear slots. If Torech was to win another trick, let's say it looked like that, then the 2 cards that were already in the slot would slide down, and the next 2 cards would go at the top space. You can see this arrow here as a reminder to move the cards down as they fill up. And then if a third trick was won, this set would slide all the way off, this would come down, and these 2 would fill in, and the ones that came off get revealed, and then Torech's token moves a number of spaces equal to the difference between these 2 cards. So 9 minus 3 would be 6, so Torech would move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Anytime Torech lands or goes past one of these spots, you'll gain that event tile and trigger whatever it does. I'll go over those event tiles at the end of the video, so you'll have a better understanding of what they do, but for now, let's just put Torech back to the middle and put these cards back in the tableau, and then these 2 cards that Violet had won with will go into the discard pile. Now the winner of the previous trick will lead the next trick, so since Violet won, she would be leading the next trick, but before you actually play a card, we need to get back up to 4 cards in hand. So we will draft from the 4 cards that are face up again, like we did at the beginning of the game. However, this is always done in order of the winner of the trick and then the other player. Violet doesn't get to choose the order this time. So Violet won the trick, she must take first, then Torech will take after. So Violet will go ahead and take this card, we refill the tableau, and Torech will take a card, and maybe they decide that one, and refill. Now, as I mentioned, there are some card abilities on certain cards which may impact if you actually draft from the main face-up tableau or not, but again, I'll go over all those abilities shortly at the end of the video. So for now, let's just show you what would happen though if Torech wins the trick. I went over the fear slots, but there's a couple other things that will happen as far as Violet's movement. So let's say Violet decides to play that 7 mushroom, and Torech plays this 8 mushroom. Torech is winning the trick, so now Violet moves along the journey track. Normally when she wins, she can decide to move 1, spend 1, or not move at all. But whenever Torech wins, Violet is forced to move 1 space, but then she spends 2 units of fuel instead of 1. Additionally, whenever Torech wins the trick and Violet is to move on one of Ordep's helpers, she does still spend 2 units of fuel. She only gets the benefit from these if she wins the trick and is the one that moves onto that token, because this helper is helping her when she's taking her time moving through. But if Torech is scaring and pushing her along, she's not paying attention and doesn't see that bright light on the normal path, essentially. So in this case, though, on the second trick, we just move 1 and spend 2. And as we said earlier, the 2 cards that were played in the trick go on Torech's fear slot up at the top. And because Torech won the trick, Torech will then take one of the 4 cards from the tableau, putting it into their hand, refilling, and then having Violet draft a card. Maybe she takes that 9 here and flips a new one. And then we'd have Torech lead the next trick, and you'd constantly go back and forth playing these tricks until one of the 3 endgame triggers has happened. Before we get to the endgame triggers, there's a couple other things of movement I want to go over as well. The second to last space on the journey track has an exclamation point, and that's because might be a little hard to see, but right here there's a rickety bridge to cross. When Violet is on this space, to move across that rickety bridge, she has to win the trick. Whenever Torech wins, she's being forced to move and spend 2 fuel because she's being moved by fear, but this bridge is too scary, so Violet needs to take her time and actually spend her own effort to move across. So essentially, the very last trick of the game, Violet has to win. If she keeps losing, she's just going to stay in place, but she still will lose 2 units of fuel. So if she is here and the fuel's all the way down there, she could keep losing and will eventually lose the game. Because now going into the 3 different ways the game can end, the first one is if she ever runs out of fuel. If Violet's fuel track gets to the very bottom, she is in complete darkness and can't see where she's going and gets lost, and Torech wins the game. The other way Torech can win is if the Torech pawn ever catches up to Violet on the journey track. The very beginning, there's the fear track at the bottom that only Torech can go on. But you'll notice there's this arrow that starts to catch up with the actual journey track. So as Torech moves along here and collects these events, eventually he'll catch up to the journey track and start going on the journey track where Violet goes. So if Torech's here, and let's say Violet's there, remember Torech moves based on the cards that are in this fear slots. So when they eventually move down, Torech is going to move the difference of these cards. So 7 and 8 would be 1 space. But if we had a difference of, let's say, 4 and 9, that's 5 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Still 1 away. As soon as Torech matches the space of Violet, Torech wins the game. Now, an additional thing to pay attention to are these 2 spaces on the lantern track. The more fuel that gets burned from Violet's lantern, the additional amount of fear that gets generated when Torech moves. So if the lantern is on this space or lower, there's an additional 1 movement that Torech gets whenever they calculate the amount between. So 9 and 4 would be 5, plus 1 would be 6. If the lantern is ever there or lower, it's plus 2. And this is not cumulative, it's either 1 or 2. So being here isn't going to be an extra 3, it's only an extra 2 spaces. So that's another reason why Violet might want to get more fuel back. 1, that's a way she loses the game, but 2, if she can move back 3 spaces, it now makes that amount lower from what it was before. Either way, those are the 2 ways that Torech can win the game, running out of fuel or catching up to Violet, whereas Violet wins the game when she reaches her friend Ordep at the end of the trick. And now we'll go over all 9 card effects on each card, starting from 1, working our way up to 9. Whenever a 1 is played in the same trick as a 9, the 1 will actually beat the 9. And it doesn't matter the order in which the 1 or the 9 are played, as well as the colors of those 2 cards. This 1 will beat any of the 9s. The only exception to that is if Violet is on the location that the 1 is on. Because remember, all abilities of the suit that Violet is at do not trigger. So in this case, this ability doesn't happen, and this 1 is not stronger than a 9 for that purpose, but this card is still trump, so it is actually going to beat out the 9 anyways because trump is stronger than that suit. But if the 9 of pink was played here, this 9 is winning because these are both the trump suit, this ability doesn't trigger, 9 is stronger than 1. The number 2 card allows you to draw 3 cards from the top of the deck and put them into your hand, so that you'll have a 6-card hand. You then pick 2 of them, any 2 you want, including the ones you just drew, and put them back into the deck and shuffle it together. This then gives you a 4-card hand. And this is essentially replacing your normal drafting that you would do from the 4 face-up cards that happen during Phase D. It's important to mention normally Phase B is where effects will trigger, but this one happens during Phase D when you're refilling your hand. You're just drawing the 3 from the deck instead of from the face-up tableau. The number 3 card also triggers during the D phase, where you take 5 cards from the top of the deck, and you look at them all and take 1 of them into your hand, making sure to keep the order of all the 4 other cards and put them back on top of the deck. That 1 card you took then goes into your hand, so now you'll have a 4-card hand and you won't draw from one of the face-up tableau cards. The 4 ability allows you to exchange 1 card from your hand with 1 card in the discard pile. During the D phase, when you would be drawing cards back up, you go through the entire discard pile, choose to take something back, and then swap it with a card in your hand. You can actually swap back the card you just took if you want to bluff something and essentially not change your hand at all, but you are able to get rid of something else to put back in the discard pile. And because this one keeps you at a hand size of 3, you will draft one of the face-up cards from the tableau after. The 5 is a special wild card. It will always match whatever suit Violet is in. So if Violet was in the pink area, this is a pink 5, purple area, purple 5, brown area, brown 5, and green area, green 5. If she's ever in one of the neutral spaces, either the 3 here or the 3 over there, it matches whatever the color is that your opponent played. And if both players play a 5, the first one played would win. The 6 will block the trump suit if it's the first card played in the trick. So for example, if Violet plays this 6 pink and we're in the brown area, if Torech decides to play any brown card, normally brown would be trump and would win the trick, so something like this. However, this is blocking the effect of trump actually taking place. So in this situation, Violet would actually win the trick. The only way you can win against a card that's played with that trump is to play a 7, 8, or 9 of the same suit. And of course, if you played this card while you were in that area, this technically doesn't trigger because it's in the trump suit of that. But because this is still the lead suit and it is pink, it is going to be trump, so the only way to still beat it would be a 7, 8, or a 9. The 7 is pretty straightforward. It allows you to look at your opponent's hand. This does happen during the B phase, after you determine who wins the trick. So any card draw that would happen during the D phase, say from the 3 or 4, would remain hidden from your opponent. They would only see what happens beforehand. And lastly, the 8 and 9 do not have any ability. They are simply just the 2 highest cards in that suit. So we went over how to gain these 4 advantage tokens earlier, but what do you do when you have them? Well, when Violet has gone through the area of that suit and collects one of these tokens, she'll put it in front of her to be able to use for any future use. When you spend these, you will discard them from the game, and what it allows you to do is discard whatever 4 cards are in the tableau and refill them entirely with 4 new cards. And this is something you can do before drawing or after drawing in your hand. So maybe Violet drew a card, a new one came up that they don't really want Torech to get. You could spend that token to discard those 4 cards and have it refill. And now to go through all 10 event tiles. A quick reminder, the way Torech earns the event tiles are the 3 when they're placed here, and Torech moves or exceeds past those spaces on the fear track. So let's say we have these 3 out here. If Torech was ever to move past multiple in a single turn, you do gain access to both of them, but you'll place them in order from right to left. So at the very beginning of the game, when Torech is placing these events, you ideally want to put the one you want access to first, all the way on the right, with the one on the left, the one later to get to. But now going through all of the event tiles, starting with the fairy ring, as soon as Torech gets the fairy ring, you must immediately place it somewhere on the journey track that has not been reached by Violet yet. So if Violet was here, you cannot put it on any one of these spaces. It'd have to go in front. The way the fairy ring works is once Violet is on that space, if she ever loses a trick, normally Torech forces her to move 1 and she loses 2 fuel. The fairy ring she gets lost in and just stays there. Every trick she loses, she spends 2 fuel but does not move. The only way to get out of the fairy ring is for Violet to win a trick and spend her movement to get out, and 1 fuel, of course, and she moved. She technically can stay there when she wins to gain 3 fuel back, but it is highly not advised because you want to get out of the fairy ring as soon as possible. The next one is off track. It works very similar to the fairy ring, where you must place it on the main journey ahead of where Violet is. And whenever you do, it just makes a new track space. As you can see with the equal sign, it equals the color of whatever you placed it on. So if I do something like this, it now essentially means there's 4 green spaces. So when she moves, she comes there, next one is here, and then instead of going to the brown as normal, there's 1 additional green space you have to go to before you can move on to the brown. You cannot cover up the 2 spaces because it's just literally adding an extra track. You're off track before you get back onto the normal one. If you were to put it onto a neutral, it would simply just be a new neutral space. The next one is Gust of Wind, and this makes you lose 2 units of fuel. Pretty straightforward. As soon as Torech gets it, you just drop 2 spaces. If Violet was 2 or 1 away from losing, this would make the game end immediately. Next up is A Storm is Brewing. Whenever you gain access to this one, you'll put it at the end of the lantern track, which just makes it shorter. So now when Violet reaches that space, she'll lose the game instead of that one extra space she would have had. A Howl in the Night scares away all of Ordep's helpers, so when Torech gains access to this, you immediately remove all remaining Ordep helpers from the board. Next up is the Scent of Fear. This token gets placed on the journey track anywhere ahead of the Fear pawn. So we could put it somewhere like there. It can be somewhere even where Violet is already behind, or even the space Violet is on. Let's just say Violet's there and the Fear pawn was somewhere over here. It had just moved past, unlocked it, and Torech decided to place it there. What this will do is trigger the Fear slot a second time. So if we set these cards up, and let's say Torech just won the trick, and we'll take these cards, slide everything down, and these will be what triggers. So 7 minus 2 is 5. So Torech is moving 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's now hit or exceeded past this, so it immediately triggers the Fear slots again. This slides down, and we reveal these cards. 6 and 5 would be 1 space. Now, this could make Torech win the game because the Fear pawn could catch up to Violet all the way, but in this situation, it did not. So the game continues, but there's now an empty Fear slot space open. So it gives Violet essentially an extra trick of wiggle room before a new set of cards comes in to then slide everything down again. So it's very powerful for Torech for the first go, but if they don't win, it allows Violet some breathing room for a second. Next up is Trick Up the Sleeve. When you gain this token, Torech will get to keep it and decide at any point during the game to spend it. When they do, it allows you to take any one card from your hand and swap it with a card in the tableau. And then, once you do that, you could potentially play the card you just took or anything else, but it's ultimately allowing you to take one card into your hand from the tableau. Next, we have the Planning Ahead token. This works exactly the same as the Advantage tokens, but this one is only available to Torech since it can only be earned by the Fear track. And then we have Adapt. This allows Torech to change one of the spaces on the journey track to a different suit that has not been reached by Violet yet. So if Violet's right here, and Torech gets control of that by moving here, they could turn this into a different suit. You can even pick one of the neutral suits depending on if she hasn't reached any of those spaces if you want. And lastly is the Resourceful event. This allows Torech to draw an additional card to have a hand of 5. When using this token, you would refill the tableau before you would draw your 5th card. And if you were ever to trigger it with one of the 2, 3, or 4 cards, you would trigger the card ability first before doing the event tile. Now this game, it's usually a little bit easier to win when playing as Torech than it is as Violet. So there's a couple recommendations. Whenever playing the game, if one player is more experienced than the other, that player should take the Violet character while the other person who's newer to the game plays as Torech. And it's also advised to play 2 games back to back, where each player swaps the roles at the end, especially if Torech wins the first round. Then you can try and see, can the other player win faster as Torech, or can the other person manage to win as Violet? Otherwise, that's everything you need to know to play Violet and the Grumpy Nisse. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below and I'll get to them as soon as I can. Thanks so much for watching.